أهلا بكم مشاهدينا الكرام إلى حلقة جديدة من مستقبل الطاقة. هذه ملفاتنا.
We must agree a new global climate finance goal.
بالرغم من نجاح مبكر في الاتفاق على آلية لسوق الكربون، فوز ترمب يخيم على مساعي التمويل في مؤتمر COP29. وفي مقابلة خاصة مع مستقبل الطاقة، الرئيس التنفيذي الأسبق لBP يقول: إضافة المزيد من الأهداف المناخية في COP29 لن يساعد في شيء. يخيم على مفاوضات المناخ في مؤتمر الأطراف COP29 في العاصمة الأذرية باكو إعادة انتخاب الرئيس السابق دونالد ترمب، والذي وعد بسحب الولايات المتحدة مجددا من اتفاقية باريس للمناخ، حيث يتفق المراقبون بأن نتيجة الانتخابات الرئاسية الأمريكية من شأنها ضرب تنسيق الجهود الدولية لتسريع عجلة التحول إلى منظومة منخفضة الكربون. فموقف الولايات المتحدة المتأرجح من اتفاقية باريس للمناخ ما زال مستمراً منذ التوصل إلى هذه الاتفاقية عام 2015. ففي عام 2016 صادقت إدارة أوباما على الاتفاقية، ليعلن الرئيس ترمب عام 2017 انسحاب بلاده منها، ليتمم الانسحاب رسمياً عام 2020، قبل أن يعيد الرئيس بايدن بلاده مجددا إلى الاتفاقية عام 2021. والآن من المتوقع أن يقوم ترامب ببدء عملية الانسحاب مجددا في يناير من عام 2025. COP29 من المفترض أن يكون مؤتمر التمويل، لأن الهدف الرئيسي من نسخة هذا العام هو تأمين اتفاقية دولية حول التمويل المناخي، وهذا يشمل تدفق الاستثمارات والقروض والمنح من الدول الغنية إلى الدول متوسطة أو منخفضة الدخل، بهدف دعمها في نشر التقنيات منخفضة الكربون وبناء بنى تحتية صلبة للتكيف مع التقلبات المناخية. فمن المفترض أن يتوصل COP29 إلى هدف جماعي محدد جديد فيما يخص التمويل المناخي، ليستبدل الهدف السابق والبالغ 100 مليار دولار سنويا الذي اتفق عليه عام 2009، والذي لم يتم تحقيقه إلا في عام 2022، حيث كان من المأمول أن يتم رفع هذا المستهدف إلى تريليون دولار سنويا. ومع انطلاقة المفاوضات يبدو التوصل إلى هذا الهدف في أسبوعي المؤتمر في باكو سيكون صعب المنال في ظل التغيرات المقبلة في البيت الأبيض، وهو فشل سيعتبر دليلا واضحا على تعثر العمل الدولي لمكافحة التغير المناخي. لكنه لن يكون مفاجئا للبعض الذي اعتبر أن فوز ترامب بالرئاسة قد حكم على COP29 بالموت حتى قبل ولادته.
We are moving in energy systems to more intelligent energy systems, more decarbonized energy systems. It's going to have huge implications for consumption, for production, and for the application of new technologies like AI. Last year, we made a very big advance, which was that we agreed at COP28 to triple renewables, double efficiency, reduce methane, and to make a transition towards low carbon energy systems for the future. This next COP is going to be the enabling COP that gives us the signals on financing that will help the world to move in this direction. But large parts of the world, and especially the UAE, are already moving in this direction. We are charting a new future, energy transition future that moves to cleaner and safer energy for the future. If you look at every year, the installation of renewable energy is the largest capacity addition to the global power sector. We're moving to a future that is going to be driven by electricity. That electricity has to be clean electricity. So I don't think it is slowing down. What the constraint and the bottleneck is for emerging economies where the demand is going to be greatest, where is the access to technology and finance that they need to do this? And the international community has to step up to support developing countries in this regard.
في اختراق مفاجئ توصل المفاوضون في مؤتمر كوب 29 إلى اتفاق حول القوانين التنظيمية لسوق عالمية للكربون تحت إدارة الأمم المتحدة، حيث من المفترض أن تحرر هذه السوق مليارات الدولارات من التمويل لمشاريع خفض الانبعاثات في الدول النامية، حيث ستمكن هذه السوق المشترين من الدول المتقدمة الغنية من تحقيق مستهدفاتهم المناخية عبر شراء شهادات الكربون من المشاريع التي تخفف الانبعاثات. قوانين سوق الكربون هذه والمعروفة ببند 6.4 تنظم عملية تداول شهادات الكربون بين الدول من خلال السوق التي ستشغلها الأمم المتحدة. وقد كانت هذه القوانين عالقة في المفاوضات لسنوات عدة بسبب الخلافات حول مصداقيتها وكيفية التأكد من أن أي تخفيضات موعودة في الانبعاثات هي تخفيضات إضافية ويمكن التحقق منها. وبحسب رئيس مؤتمر كوب 29 مختار بابايف، فإن هذه السوق يمكن أن تخفض تكلفة تحقيق المستهدفات المحددة وطنيا بنحو 250 مليار دولار سنويا. لنستمع إلى أجزاء من المؤتمر الصحفي في باكو الذي ناقش تفاصيل هذا الاتفاق.
The Article 6 operationalization is a long-standing unresolved issue, and yesterday on the 6.4 we have adopted the standards that was endorsed by the supervisory body for mechanism, and the amount that I have referred to, 250 billion to reach out to, in total the total value of the flows of carbon market that is aligned with Article 6, based on the assessment of the International Emission Trading Association, will reach to that figure if we operationalize it and if the mechanism starts working. And it could reach up to 1 trillion per year by 2050, based on the projects that can be implemented in developing countries.
In putting forward the standards that oversee the centralized UN mechanism for markets, we took into consideration really what we wanted this mechanism to do, which was we wanted it to incentivize project developers to go for the high-hanging fruit instead of the low-hanging fruit. And so it really looks at the projects that are not financially feasible currently, that are very ambitious, and how can this mechanism help in providing some stream of revenue to those projects, but in a way that balances host party priorities as well as the priorities of the party that's going to be receiving some of the credits or the claims coming from these projects. And so we took great care in putting forward these standards, and we are working very hard to make sure that we operationalize it as fast as we can, but as safely as we can in the new Paris world.
I think we have really a step change in terms of crediting mechanisms, in the sense that we know that crediting is not a substitute for deep cuts, but we have provided a potential supply that is aligned with Paris, and that's a significant undertaking, a real challenge. And I think we have got in the detail, if you were to look into it, several proposals that guarantee that. But we're part of the system, we're an enabler. And the figures that one hears about investment are highly dependent on demand, and the assumptions behind the modelling require us to have Paris-aligned targets and for people to be willing to engage in targets through markets. And those are the two assumptions, I think, that are behind those figures. But they're definitely honest projections based on those assumptions. We're just part of the picture, and if people want to invest, I think we will deliver transformational projects rather than just low cost.
نتوقف مع فاصل قصير نتابع بعده في مستقبل الطاقة. على هامش الكوب 29 السعودية تطلق التداولات في سوق الكربون الطوعي الإقليمية. أهلا بكم من جديد. بعد يوم من اتفاق المفاوضين في COP29 على معايير سوق شهادات الكربون، أطلقت السعودية على هامش المؤتمر التداولات على منصتها لتداول شهادات الكربون، والتي تديرها شركة سوق الكربون الطوعي الإقليمية. كما تم إطلاق المزاد الثالث للمنصة على شهادات بحجم قياسي عالمي بلغ 2.5 مليون طن، شارك فيها 22 شركة سعودية ودولية. وستساعد هذه المنصة من خلال أعلى معايير المصداقية والشفافية في اعتماد شهادات الكربون على سد الفجوة التمويلية لمشاريع خفض الانبعاثات في دول الجنوب العالمي، وفي دعم جهود السعودية في تحقيق مستهدفاتها للوصول إلى صافي صفر.
الجودة والنزاهة ده شيء مهم جدا بالنسبة لنا، شيء مهم للشركة وشيء مهم للمشتري بتاعنا. فاحنا انا اديك مثل المزاد ده احنا عملنا ايه. احنا عملنا يعني معايير مختلفه لضمان الجوده والنزاهه. اولا داخليا في الشركه معانا يعني مجموعتين منفصلين عن بعض بيراجعوا كل مشروع احنا بنقدمه، اذا كان في اي شيء ريد فلاج زي ما بيقولوا بنطلع المشروع ده تماما. فنسبه اللي قبلناه 10% من المتقدم لينا. ده يدل على قد ايه احنا بندقق وبنحقق في كل مشروع يتقدم. غير كده احنا معايير الجوده راجعنا ICBCM، وده كوميتي ويعني انتجريتي كونسل بتحقق في الميثودولوجيز، في المعايير المصدره، اذا كانت المعايير دي فيها يعني دقيقه للنزاهه ولا لا. فاحنا اتبعنا ده برضو. ومعانا الكريدت ريتنج ايجنسيز او اللي بتدي كريدت على كل بروجكت. عملنا يعني كذا لاير وكذا لمراجعه النزاهه، والنتيجه 10% من المتقدم بس اللي قبلناه. عندنا 4 عروض على المنصه. العرض الاول هو المزادات، عرض طلب اسعار، السوق الفوري، والعروض المختلفه اللي هي 2 بيشتروا بره المزاد بيجيبوها بلوك تريد بنسميها، اللي هم بيجيبوا اتفاق بره، بيجوا عشان السيتلمنت التسويه والKYC بروسيس. ده بيجوا يعملوا سيتلمنت على التسويه عندنا في المنصه. احنا اطلقنا كذا كل ال4، ولكن العقود الستاندردايز تطلق العام القادم ان شاء الله.
في مقابلة خاصة لمستقبل الطاقة، التقينا الرئيس التنفيذي الأسبق لشركة BP بوب دودلي، والذي يرأس مجموعة مبادرة النفط والغاز للمناخ، والتي تضم 12 شركة من كبار شركات النفط عالميا مثل أرامكو وإكسون وشيفرون وتوتال وشيل وBP وCNPC الصينية وغيرها. كشف لنا دودلي بأن المجموعة قامت باستثمار كامل قيمة صندوقها البالغ $1 مليار في شركات تعمل في تقنيات ناشئة لنزع الكربون، وأن المجموعة بصدد إطلاق صندوق ثان وتفكر في ثالث. كما تناولنا الجهود التي تبذلها صناعة النفط والغاز في خفض بصمتها الكربونية، إلى جانب رؤيته لتطور سوق الهيدروجين الأزرق الذي وصفه بالبطيء، وهذا إلى جانب توقعاته لمخرجات مؤتمر COP29، والذي أمل بأن يركز على المراقبة والتطبيق بدلا من إطلاق مستهدفات جديدة لن تساعد في شيء على حد تعبيره. أترككم مع هذا اللقاء. Bob Dudley, it's great to have you again. Some investors are pressing IOC majors to exit certain carbon-intensive assets. But these assets simply move off their balance sheets and onto the balance sheets of private operators. These private operators are hidden away from the public eye, so the emissions are still there. Do you think this sort of investor pressure is self-defeating, really?
Well, a little bit it would be, because all you do is move it out, and then they can't focus on it as much where they can with the IOCs. IOCs will only make decisions if it's economic and it makes sense. So it's not so much the pressure that comes along. There are late life assets and it's time to divest to others, but it doesn't make them go away.
Well, on that note, Bob, how important is the oil and gas decarbonization charter, which was launched last year at the COP28 in Dubai, in expanding decarbonization efforts to encompass a greater number of those private players and other NOCs?
So I chair something called the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, OGCI, and the companies there were working on this and committed to it. But by the time we got to COP28, more than 50 companies had signed up for it. I personally think it's about the most practical thing that came out of COP in years. It was actually targets set, private industry there, helpful. It was only 3 years ago where oil and gas companies were not welcome at a COP. I think the UAE did a great job in saying, no, this is important. Dr. Sultan was a great leader in that, and I think it actually will change the world. The IOCs, the big ones, are well on their way with these targets, but many of the NOCs didn't even measure it. They needed help, and so it's brought a group of people together, and many of the companies are helping each other, moving it forward, and there'll be more that join. They've all set a baseline, which is amazing for many of the companies. So I think it's off to a great start, and OGCI is helping monitor and manage that going forward. So to me, really important development for the world of energy.
Eliminating routine flaring is one of the low-hanging fruits, yet the industry hasn't been able to really nail that in the past few years and decades. The new target set at COP28 is to zero in on routine flaring by 2030. What do you think is needed in order for the industry to reach this target this time around? Why hasn't this been tackled firmly and decisively by the industry much earlier? And what really needs to be done in order for the industry to really nail it this time?
Well, most of the IOCs, if not all of them, the OGCI members are well on that and have done it effectively. Routine flaring, sometimes you have to prevent danger. The big developments that have happened, I would say, in the last 2 or 3 years, not back 5 or 10 years, is the ability to see them with satellites and measure them. You know where the issue is, and now the companies are working together, particularly with other big NOCs that just didn't even think about it. It's not something you can see, you can't taste it, you can't smell it, but when you get the technology that can identify it, that's going to change the world. So that's why it's taken a while, and now that new technology is going to have a lot of companies focusing on it. And some of them need help from their IOC partners, and that's also happening. So I think we're going to get there.
Hopefully. Moving on to low carbon hydrogen, it's definitely a potential solution in the future. It's technically feasible, yet it's still very costly at the moment. Many experts point to the fact that there hasn't been any demand materializing. So do you think this is a classic situation of what comes first, supply or demand, the classic situation of what comes first, the chicken or the egg?
Well, some companies are moving forward developing hydrogen, blue hydrogen, but also important is blue ammonia. They're very linked because ammonia you can actually ship. Hydrogen is a little bit harder to move around. So I'm on the board of Aramco, and they have been developing blue hydrogen and ammonia and working with Japan and South Korea. But I have to say, those markets have been quite slow to develop. And they're the ones who really want to do this really well. But you've got to match supply and demand. Otherwise, companies will just develop it and have it for nowhere to go. So like many things in the old days, LNG, even solar, you have to match supply, demand, and economics. And it's moving in that direction, but the development of markets for hydrogen and blue ammonia is slower.
Do you think that will pick up for demand for blue ammonia in the next couple of years?
I think particularly in Asia, I think in South Korea and Japan it will. They're probably going to be leaders in this, and then there'll be localized leaders in industry that might need it for certain plants that they have near the coast and things like that. But it's going to take a while because the economics really are not competitive yet.
Back in 2017, OGCI has launched a OGCI Climate Investments to create a $1 billion plus fund to invest in upcoming technologies, companies, and projects that could accelerate decarbonization, not just in the energy sector, but in other sectors as well. Give us an overview of what the fund has deployed its investments in, and what any milestones you've achieved in that fund over the last few years.
Yes, well, it's closed out, so it's invested $1 billion now and invested in 35 companies. It's actually started a second fund, a decarbonization acceleration fund, because people see how good due diligence OGCI did, and they're investing now. So it's not just OGCI, another. And we're looking at a third one coming up. So I'll give you a good example of a company that might not be around, that OGCI invested heavily in. Other people have, called GHG Sat, Canadian company. Put satellites up around the world and identified, monitored methane leakage. And that's changed the world, for example. These are all early life. It invested in a cement company that sequestered CO2 when it cured. That was a new thing. There's a whole set of CCS companies. So it was all very, very early life, long life. The new funds will be later life, proven technology. So I'm just really proud of what the team has done. $1 billion of investment, 35 companies, now moving on to a second and a third set of funds is going to change the world. And I think OGCI is one of the more thorough ones. You can imagine 12 companies have to do diligence and approve things. They really understand the technology. And I don't think funds around the world are doing that.
Part of the solution, Bob, is how we view carbon as a material with an inherent value rather than just a byproduct that we want to get rid of. A lot of work is being done on carbon capture technologies and on storage and sequestration options, but is there enough work being done on looking at how other industries can actually use the carbon capture?
Well, so carbon capture and sequestration, some of it is pumping it into the ground, holding it forever below ground. That's one kind. But carbon fiber research and what the use of that is, graphene, things like that, there's work going on that. It's quite competitive and quite secretive, but there's a lot of research going on in companies on that. That's one. I laugh at the use of CO2 for carbonation of beverages. There's just some of that going on, and there's been shortages of that. But the really big, and then there's the direct air capture, which a number of companies are doing. Oxy is one of them. So there's a whole spectrum with carbon sequestration. The economics of some of it still have a ways to go, but if you can do it at scale, particularly, I'll give you an example with Saudi Arabia, they can gather CO2 and inject it into the ground, and it's quite a lot of scale. And then to set a market here, they're in discussions with some countries who would like blue hydrogen and ammonia that they can provide. And then the countries are saying, can we ship liquid CO2 back to you in Saudi Arabia so you can put it in the ground, because we don't have anywhere to do it. To me, that's a great indication of people are starting to think about a market that most people don't know about. It hasn't happened, but it's close, I think.
Finally, Bob, what are your expectations for COP29 in Baku this year? Should the conference focus more on reviewing implementation of past initiatives and goals rather than just new announcements of new goals and new targets?
Well, it's easy to announce targets, but it's not what you say, it's what you do. And what we've done coming out of COP28 is something that's actually practical and doing and making it, and definitely the monitoring it should happen both at 29 and 30, which will be in Brazil. For years, industry wasn't invited to COP. And so those in industry used to think it's just a political talk shop. I hope in Baku, they build on these practical things coming out of 28. It'll happen anyway, but I think that's really important, which is adding more and more targets. To me, makes people feel better. But there's a difference. And so I think focusing on the implementation, the monitoring, the changing of what energy companies do is one part of it. But COP is not just about oil and gas. I mean, it's supposed to be about everything, steel, aluminum, other things. I'm not quite an expert on what they're doing, but if they can get practical in the way that oil and gas is coming out of 28, that would be good. But just setting more targets it's not going to help, in my view.
نهاية حلقة مستقبل الطاقة لهذا الأسبوع. تابعونا على منصة إكس تحت هاشتاغ مستقبل الطاقة، وجميع الحلقات موجودة على قناتنا على اليوتيوب. إلى اللقاء.